you don't vote the way I say, you have no future in the party. That's exactly what Obama said to Buttigieg and Klobuchar to get them out of the race.
What did you call him, Norm?
The New York Times had this long article analyzing his fashion. Who the fuck cares? And the message was, do you want me to formally endorse you on my Twitter, or it will cause you problems? Because most of the time people say, don't. Do you want? And he said, yes. I hate the expression, it's so hackneyed, but he was entering dog whistle terrain. He has awakened a mass of people, just like Bernie Sanders, with the hope that a better world is possible.
And they can be put back to sleep. We know that because we saw Bernie.
I don't know what he's going to do. First of all, there's a good chance he'll be assassinated. I think that's a realistic possibility.
Yeah, I haven't wanted to say that out loud on
I think that's a realistic
camera, but I worry about him a lot.
Yeah. And he has to make clear to his constituency, they have the money, they have the institutions, they have the media, all of it in their back and front pockets. We have only one thing. We have numbers. We have truth and we have numbers. And when people say things like, well, he can't change the tax laws unless the governor and the state legislature approves of it, there's a very simple answer to that question. We're going to bring 100,000 people up to Albany, and we're going to surround the chamber. Or if there are concerns that redound on the city council, we're going to bring 1 million people to surround the city council. Now that's going to be called extortion. It's going to be called intimidation. Yeah, except the billionaire class do that all the time on their telephones when they say, unless you do X, Y, and Z, we're going to take our money out. When you say you're going to move to Florida, which is saying the billionaires are going to move to Florida, okay? And there goes the tax base. Isn't that extortion?
Mm-hmm. Or when you say you're going to oust the president of Harvard University.
Yeah. Either crush the encampments or we're withholding alumni funds. Isn't that extortion? Mm-hmm. Isn't that intimidation? So when he's asked that question, and it's put to him as if you have no answer, there is an answer. Now, whether he's going to say that answer, yes, and then we're going to have demonstrations at City Hall. We're going to bring out 1 million people who are going to demand X, Y, and Z. Now, he's not ready to say that because what's the result. It's going to be the extortion, the intimidation, and then he has to say, yeah, but you know what? The billionaire class is extorting and intimidating every day. And
that's the comms job I want. If he gets to that place, that's the comms job I want. But I think the real question that we're having right now, the real conversation is, like, are we giving him the benefit of the doubt on the how intense his language is, how confrontational his language is, because he hasn't yet won the race yet, and we're, And is that okay and a good thing? Or is it a mistake for him to moderate at this juncture at all, or to continue? I don't know, moderating is too strong, but is it a mistake to not be more adversarial at this juncture? Because the only way he'll make it to Gracie Mansion is by coming full force at this stage. And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if it's smart politics to try to stay the course through the election, the general, or if they'll figure out a way to stop him unless he escalates. I don't know.
I don't think people give a darn whether he says, I'm willing to listen to the billionaire class. What they do give a darn is he backing down? And he's not backing down.
But these things are...
But there is the problem of...
They're related. They're related. I think, and I take Shama's point, it's not just what he says rhetorically in a MSNBC interview. Mm-hmm. It's whether or not that is reflecting a state of mind. And that's why I mentioned, okay, well, it seems in practice, he's rallying his troops, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, not because I just think he's saying it for now, but because what he's doing with his actions is rallying the troops.
I knew of his father, Mahmoud Mamdani. I knew of him, believe it or not, in the mid 1970s. He was a
Oh
Maoist.
yeah.
Yes, he was a Maoist. Uh, he was at that point, he had written a book for this publishing house called Monthly Review Press, which was it was the last remnant of the socialist left in our country after the McCarthy era, during and after the McCarthy era. It was headed up by the great Marxist economist Paul Sweezy. Uh, and he wrote a book called, I know you, how can this guy remember this stuff? Well, I do remember it because that was part of my youth. A book called Politics and Class Formation in Uganda. Now you're asking me, you're wondering, why is he reading a book about politics and class formation in Uganda? Because if you were of
Why
the
not?
left, you read books like that, you know? And so his father was what you would call a hardcore Marxist. And eventually, like many of those people, he ended up getting a quite cushy university position at Columbia. In that regard, our trajectories parted ways. He was significantly older. He's significantly older than me. He must be in his 80s now.
Hmm.
Um, so I have no doubt, given his family background, he recognizes that the billionaire class, it's a double class, you see. It's a his two he, he is a double whammy for them. It's the billionaires. The billionaire class cares about only two things: making the Upper East Side safe for billionaires and making New York safe for Israel. That's it. That's all they care about. There are only two concerns. And so he's a double threat to them. You know, when he says, if Netanyahu comes to New York, I'm going to arrest him, that's a death warrant. You know, that really, it's a death warrant. They probably care more about that than they do about the 2% tax increase, which is basically their liquor bill for a weekend. You know? So uh, uh, he, given his family background, uh, he knows full well what he's facing, and he does think that projecting toxic positivity may help him out in the race. And it's not Sharma, you know. If he got on the news and said, "Listen, capitalism is a zero-sum game. There are the billionaires, and there are the rest of us."
No, but
And
come on.
then it's not. It's just I'm
But
willing
come
to
on,
say it's
that's
not
not
going
it.
to work.
But that's not what we're advocating for. It's what you
That's what she
just
says. She
no no
just
no.
said,
Well, no. The
I've heard
argument isn't
I've heard
no no
zero
no.
sum game at least 5 times since Donnie won the election, won the
The
primary.
argument isn't whether Zohran should become Shama. The art because there's a lot of other things tonally substantive. Like there's a lot of different aspects of their approaches that are different. The question is whether Zohran, with a smile on his face, is what because when he attacks Cuomo, he's still kind of smiling and cheeky about it. He doesn't like scowl and say Cuomo was a
Well,
so and so
sometimes
get him
when
out
he
of.
discusses the substantive issues, like whether or not you believe billionaires should exist, he gets very serious and he says no. When you have
Right, but
so much
he's
poverty,
not militant. He's not militant like Shama is.
yeah.
You can feel Shama's anger, righteous anger,
Mhm.
dripping off of every syllable she pronounces. So like that's but the question is whether or not he's going to put a finer point on it. It's the substance of what he's saying.
And
I
I
don't
think the
I,
substance he's held firm so far. On the substance, he's held firm.
Right,
Look,
but when the day comes, like the question is, and this is also perspective that it's maybe we're going round and round, it's not worth doing. But the question is when the day comes when Kathy Hochul has already said she's not going to give him the
yeah,
funds for
and
various
I think and,
pieces of his agenda.
listen, this was Bernie's big failing. You see, Bernie's big failing was, and I don't actually blame him. because I just don't believe he was constitutionally able to do it. He was repeatedly asked the same question as Mamdani is being asked. He was asked over and over again, how are you going to get your legislative program through in Congress with all the opposition? And Bernie had the same answer over and over again. He said, we're going to have to bring out masses of people. That's how you get it through. You have to exercise that right of assembly and make clear we will not abide a legislature that blocks this program that's backed by the people in their overwhelming majority. Bernie, when the moment of truth came, he couldn't do it. He was like an old-fashioned socialist orator. But when the moment of truth arrived, the moment of truth arrived, he reverted back to the legislative gadfly. He preferred to just have Biden's left ear because he knew if he called out the people, all hell would break loose between him and the Democratic National Committee. They would go, what do you mean, bringing all those people? You're trying to intimidate us? What do you want to have a revolution? You want to overthrow the government? You're a communist? He knew he would face that. And also, I think he was probably a little scared at that prospect, of letting that genie out of the bottle. Masses, millions of people in the street. If you're not a revolutionary in your heart and soul, it's actually a scary prospect because it looks like anarchy is breaking loose. So he couldn't do it. And the real test for Mamdani is going to be, I believe, just like with Bernie, if I can use that hackneyed expression, I believe the masses are ready. They were ready for Bernie. They were ready to go in the street. If he had said, go into the street, we're getting that Medicare for all, we're not going to let Congress, they would have gone. They would have packed the buses and gone.
Yeah.
And I think
yes. Sorry, but that's why, if I can just do this one more time, sorry to force avoid it, but that's why people were so pissed off about the lack of support from the progressives around the Medicare for All rallies during the pandemic.
Because I don't think they were constitutionally ready for that. That level, you talked about violence, blood. They weren't ready for that prospect. And now the question is going to be with Mamdani. Now, bear in mind, Zohran Mamdani said he had 50,000 volunteers.
Yeah.
50,000 is a lot of people to surround City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very intimidating sight. That's what the billionaire class is most afraid of. There's the Israel issue. But the ultimate fear, I know Mr. Mamdani's getting attacked a lot for using the word ultimately, but the ultimate the ultimate fear is, there was a very good film on when Allende's regime was overthrown in Chile, and the title of the film was When the People Awake. When the People Awake. That's their ultimate fear. The people awaking. And, I teach those people. I teach them. My class, I teach City University. It's mostly immigrant, first generation immigrant, and poor working white kids. I mean, not dirt poor, but scraping by. And I'll tell you something. I don't flatter. Not in my chemistry. I don't flatter. The social media has done many destructive things to the human mind. Notwithstanding, these young people, the 20-something, they're still mentally very nimble. They're still don't ask me how. I can't understand it. You're like this all day, even walking in the street, on the toilet, in the restaurant, on the subway. I don't know how it is, but I teach. I know the young people. They're still very mentally nimble. They have very clear moral sense of right and wrong. It's not been clouded It's not been clouded. Most of the time, it gets clouded by education, unfortunately. The famous line by Rousseau in the Second Discourse, he says that all of our moral corruption comes from reason, the capacity to come up with an excuse for doing the most horrible things.
That's what
And
I was saying about voting. That's what I was saying about voting for Harris.
and then he has
Rousseau has my back, and you had that quote in your pocket, Norm, and you were just
he then
you were
says,
arguing against me and Rousseau.
he says a philosopher, he says, can look out the window, see the most horrible crime, and then he walks away from the window. He says the philosopher stops up his ears and says, quote, perish if you will, I am safe. Perish if you will. I don't give a darn what happens to that person.
This is what I mean when I say a toddler gets it, but an adult doesn't.
The young people, they don't have that perish if you will. It's a not wanting to flatter, trying to be objective, no illusions. It's a solid generation. And that's who I saw going out for Mamdani. They dressed drab. You could see they don't go to gyms. No, you could see it. They were just honest, decent, young people who felt they're entitled to a future. They're entitled to a future. So if he calls them out, they'll go out. That's what the ruling elite, that's what the billionaire class fears the most. The people awaking. And then the real question is not, in my view, I agree with Sharma, I agree with Rosa Luxemburg, illusions are the enemy of revolution. The biggest ally of revolution is truth and clarity. I agree with all that. But having said that, I don't think that's the big question now. The big question is, if Mamdani does win, will he take that next step of calling out, quote unquote, the masses? Because they'll come out. They'll come out, but it will be serious business.
You think as mayor of New York, there's a real expectation that he's going to make those kinds of moves as opposed to just getting down to the business of buses and grocery stores? I mean, staffing up with de Blasio, people suggest, and maybe it's not incumbent on him to do more than this, but that his job, that the people elect him to do, is to fix New York, and it's more limited than that.
In my opinion, that is not going to happen. It will happen. I know this is going to seem like a far-fetched analogy, but it really isn't. It's going to happen what happened in Egypt when the Muslim Brotherhood was elected. The capitalist class will not accept it. They want the power to be retained by them. And from day one, the capitalist class did everything they can to sabotage the economy. Now you say, well, he just wants groceries and he just wants childcare. And of course, that's why I was talking about with your producer, if you don't mind me saying his name, Avram. That's what I was talking about. I said in my day growing up, City University was free. CUNY was free in New York. Do you want to hear this? Stony Brook, Binghamton, Albany, Buffalo, they were de facto free because everything came free if you won a Regent scholarship, but everybody won a Regent scholarship. It was a kind of a giveaway, So this is not radical, these proposals, but here's the problem, Brianna, here's the problem. If he's allowed to succeed with that, they'll want more. And they won't let him succeed. They want the power in their hands. And for them, the worst possible scenario is he wins the demands, because it's a case of the hunger increasing with each bite. Well, we can have this. Why shouldn't we have that? And why shouldn't we have that? And so they will do everything they can from day one. It will be, the expression they call the capital strike. They will, the billionaire class will go on strike just like they did in Egypt to sabotage the economy.
And
And
when that
then
happens, if and when that happens, do you expect
I don't know.
Zohran to call it out for what it is?
Look, we already know Bernie wouldn't go that far.
Exactly. They were doing the thing to him and he wouldn't just call it out for what it was.
I don't know what he's going to do. I don't think any of us know what he's going to do. And as of now, I don't want to say, it's what you call a rational hope. Lenin, in his book, What Is to Be Done, he said there are two kinds of dreams. There's one kind of dream, which is just pie in the sky. Okay? But then he says, for people on the left, there's a rational dream. That is to say, you look how history is moving, you see its direction, and it's a rational dream that we can create a communist society. So he said, people on the left, they also dream. The difference between a dream on the left and a dream on the right, a dream on the left and a non-left dream is the dream on the left is, at least they believed back then, obviously times have changed, they believed back then in what they called historical inevitability. The idea that capitalism would break down, it would bring a socialist revolution, and so forth. So that was a rational dream. Now, in the case of Mamdani, I don't think it's either rational or irrational. I think it's a question mark. It's a question mark. When that moment comes, and here I agree with Sharma, it has to come. They won't let him succeed because the most important lesson they want to impart to the masses is you can't win. We called it, and when I was growing up, the expression was, you can't beat City Hall. That's that's the lesson that they must transmit. You cannot win against us. Don't bother trying. So there's no possibility. There's a few groceries, a little childcare. Who the hell cares? No, they care. They got to put the masses back to sleep. This is when the people awake moment. The people awake. And now they've got to throw them the sedative. Or it's not a sedative. Take out a nice stick and break it over their head. So I think we don't know. We don't know.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, because earlier you mentioned that you regretted that you were the age you are when all of this exciting stuff is happening.
Well,
but there's an argument. There's an argument that all this happened before when you were much younger, but then the people got the stick. So,
I think
I don't want to set you off, but Marianne makes this argument all the time that, the wave of assassinations in
I don't believe that.
the
I don't
60s,
think that's I don't really agree.
Combined with all of the sort of Powell memo repressions, the investment in conservative media, the infiltration of the court system, all of those things sucked the hope out of these movements. And you kill enough people, and there's the top level assassinations that we all celebrate in February or whatever.
The 60s, but that's that would be a digression. Now, I think a good person for you to have on the program in the near future would be Kucinich, who became the head, mayor of.
He's been on
Cleveland.
Yeah, he's been on, and I'd be happy to have him back. He was a terrific guest. But I'm curious why, Norm, you don't see the 60s as kind of pre-staging the moment that we're in now, given everything you just said about how you can't beat City Hall.
Because I don't think that's what happened.
Why not?
Because I think there's just so much illusion about the 60s and these radical groups, like the Black Panthers and this iconization of people like Eldridge Cleaver and Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. they were completely marginal figures. They were, as many people have said, they were basically telegenic figures.
Well, but why was it worth assassinating them if it
Mhm.
was just about them being telegenic? Zoran's telegenic.
First of all, as a factual matter, very few of them were assassinated. If you take the case of, I know the history very well, believe me, because I was part of that era. I was a Black Panther groupie, a complete moron, a complete idiot. I was a Black Panther groupie. In the case of Black Panthers, it was Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, and Bobby Hutton. Three people were assassinated. It wasn't the assassination, a critical assassination, in my opinion. A critical assassination was Martin Luther King. But in the case of Martin Luther King, uh, what was important about King was in his last years, everybody deserted him. If you take people like Bayard Rustin, even Jesse Jackson, they would say, oh, Martin is morbid. Martin's always talking about his death. Martin is morbid. They weren't going to Martin Luther King's credit, and again, I don't like putting people on the pedestal, but credit given where credit due. Luther King was a very impressive figure in terms of his development. He started out a petty, a black bourgeoisie preacher, had his PhD, had other degrees, and he was just going to be a little preacher in his father's church. And he developed, and he developed. He tried more and more to be consistent with his principles. And the more he became consistent with his basic principles, the more radical he became. He wanted to be consistent. But consistency demanded a more and more radical trajectory. The others, they were ready to buy in. They were ready to buy in. It wasn't the assassinations.
But
It
Norman,
was the fact.
you're
Mhm.
describing a break between people who were genuinely radical and got assassinated
A
and
few.
people who weren't and who bought in, maybe also informed by the fact that all of their genuinely radical friends were getting assassinated
No, I don't
and
think.
became the Al Sharptons of the world. So I don't know how you can dismiss not just Martin Luther King, the Malcolm X, the Kennedys, like everybody who was in a position to
No,
actually be genuinely disruptive and who
look,
had the buy-in of the public gets assassinated and you don't
no,
have anything to do with
I
the
don't think
movement
that.
energy at the
No,
time.
no.
Well, let me ask you this, Norman. If you think that do you think that if Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy hadn't been killed,
Bobby
that we
Kennedy.
would be on a different,
uh,
like, let's stay with it for a second. Do you think that we would have been on a different political trajectory?
Bobby Kennedy was the one who
I,
wiretapped
I, I
Martin Luther
understood, Norman,
King.
but you know what the arguments are about why Bobby Kennedy was killed? Like, you know, not not to go back to
What happened?
the
What
discussion we
happened?
started with.
I know I have, for better or for worse, I have a pretty sharp long-term memory. Bobby Kennedy was a total opportunist. When the anti-war movement developed, and there was a campaign, it was called to dump Johnson. It was led by this guy named Allard Lowenstein, who was a pretty revolting character himself. And then when McCarthy was successful in the campaign, Eugene McCarthy, uh, Bobby Kennedy jumped in. He was never a person of the left. He was the one who, together with his brother, led the assassination and terror campaign against Cuba. He was
But okay, Norman, I feel like
Operation Montrose.
you know that I'm making a narrow point of that. You know that I am.
I
The
don't know.
argument is that for whatever reason, you can be the worst person in the world, but if you look at Tucker Carlson, you can be the worst person in the world, but if you stand up and say Israel bad, Israel genocide, you can have a target on your back. So this isn't a holistic. Wait a minute. This isn't a holistic assessment of anybody in anybody's politics. The question is whether, and you brought this up with respect to Zohran. The question is whether these assassinations were done because the feeling was by the people who executed them that there was a real risk that they posed to the establishment, to the status quo.
Well,
And if that is Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It all depends on by what you mean a real risk. There's a very good essay which you might want to read one day because you're a reader, and I know that. It's an essay by a Russian Marxist named Plekhanov, and it's called The Role of the Great Man in History, or The Great Man Theory of History. And he says the great man theory of history is an optical illusion. That if Napoleon wasn't there, there would have been another person who
Right, but
steps into Napoleon's place.
the argument isn't about the power of an individual great man, and I'm very familiar with the great man theory of history. The question is whether or not it effectively neutered movements and prevented people from wanting to invest in said movements because there was real risk and threat to their lives.
The threat Mamdani poses, and it's a real threat. He has awakened a mass of people, just like Bernie Sanders, with the hope that a better world is possible.
And they can be put back to sleep. We know that because we saw Bernie. And they can put them to sleep one way or the other. You can convince Zohran to put them to sleep, or you can eliminate Zohran as a threat because you prevent him from getting into office.
The way you put them to sleep is you betray them. And many people felt Bernie betrayed the revolution. Right. And I said it remains an open question what Mamdani will do. I don't have an answer.
But Norman, the question is not about what he's going to do specifically. We've already sort of gone down that road. Mm-hmm. But you acknowledge that it is possible to derail a movement by either getting the leader of that movement, Bernie style, to put them down, or by some other way undermining the leader of a movement. But you seem to reject that had an effect on movements in the 60s when people were systemically undermined by being assassinated. And not just to mention the bombing, but, firebombing Black Panther headquarters, doing all kinds of things. The narrowly limiting the idea, the assassination campaigns in the 60s to it was just Martin Luther King is also ahistorical. I'm not saying you're saying just Martin Luther King, but you know what I mean? I feel like you're really downplaying it.
I lived through that era. I subsequently studied that era as much. I can't say I studied it in the depth that I did, say, the Israel-Palestine conflict, but I've certainly read the era. I'll just tell you, it's like, what's that guy's name? I think from the Black congressman from South Carolina, who's a total hack.
Jim Clyburn.
No. It could be South or North Carolina. He has an African sounding name. Sellers. Bakari
Sellers.
Yeah. And his father was a radical back then.
Yes, and this is the point. I totally agree. It doesn't have to just be an assassination, but people were paid off, bought out, infiltrated by the CIA. All of these things happened.
It didn't require that.
But don't be so narrow. It's not just the assassinations, but there was a monumental effort by the United States government to derail these movements.
I don't think it was significant. If you take, people
it's crazy.
People like Coleman Hughes, or what's the name of the congressman, the African American very young man. Everybody hates on the left. He's an Israel. Yeah, Coleman Hughes, Richie Torres. It's just money. Money,
Of course, oftentimes it's just money. I'll sharpen. I don't understand this. This isn't an argument against what I'm saying at all, though.
It's money, power, privilege.
Right. But that's not an argument against. The only reason we're talking about assassinations is because you and I agree that Zohran seems to be made of sterner stuff. That's the only reason. That's not to say that the only way that movements get derailed is assassinations. That's not the claim here at all.
The big problem with the big problem with Mamdani is it's not a structured, organized movement. It's him So there's no accountability.
Well, I think he's working on that in his defense. This is again coming back to my faith in him being rooted in the fact that he seems to be trying to build a structured, organized movement through his relationship with the unions, through his relationships with the DSA.
Then if he's held accountable to a movement, there's less danger, but there's always danger. There's always danger. You can have the most democratic movement, and there was the famous sociologist Robert Nichols, and he actually wrote a book on the German Social Democratic Party, which was the great socialist movement of the era. And he called the book, the famous phrase he coined was the iron law of oligarchy. And he said, however democratic a movement is, it always ends up, an oligarchy ends up in control. So a institutional framework is not a panacea, but at least there's some element of accountability for Zohran. Right now, the main element of accountability for Zohran Mamdani, the main element is perfectly obvious. If he starts betraying them, he'll lose them. If he starts,
and that's what India Walton said, right?
Yeah, he'll lose them. I listened to that interview. I liked her. At the beginning, I was skeptical, but I listened to her and I liked her. She was clear-eyed, commonsensical. I remember your reaction when she said the mayor was the one who moved her car, for the parking ticket thing, and how surprised you were. Yeah, she was good. I felt she was sort of like a character like Lula in Brazil. Somebody who came from, Lula was a trade union leader. And one day he became the head of state of Brazil. He didn't have pretensions, though I didn't like it when he changed from his overalls to his suit. I knew that was bad news.
Wait, how do you feel about Zohran's suit? Because there's been a lot of media about how savvy it is for him to always be dressed in a world where some of the older politicians are trying to stylish and casual.
As long as it's true to him, maybe he feels comfortable in the suit. Maybe that's how he, the question to me is not whether, the New York Times had this long article analyzing his fashion. Okay. Who the fuck cares? If it's true to him, that's just fine. And he seems, I supported him early on, and I passed the note to him, an email to him, a message to him, excuse me, through somebody. And the message was, do you want me to formally endorse you on my Twitter, or it will cause you problems? Because most of the time people say don't. And whenever a student asks me for a recommendation, I always say, go to another professor and ask the professor, should you ask Norman Finkelstein to write you a recommendation? Every single time, except once, would a student decide on his own, the answer was no. A recommendation from Finkelstein will hurt your application. And the same way, I didn't want to hurt Mamdani's campaign. And I understand how formally endorsing him might cause him problems. So I passed the message. Do you want me on my Twitter account? Even though I've never been on Twitter, but I have a social media manager. Do you want? And he said yes. So I figured, okay, the guy is better than most.
That's why you think he could handle the toxicity of me being on his comms team?
I think that he seems principled, and he's smart enough to recognize your talent. And I would want that. I would want to see that happen, because he needs the best people now.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.